Good to go, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm calling to order the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission public hearing at 5:02 p.m. on Thursday, May 21st, 2026. My name is Mark Kiefer. I'm the chairman, and I'm joined today by Commission Vice Chair Arian Allen, as well as Commissioner Jackson. We are expecting Commissioner Given to join shortly. I don't believe she's here yet, but we'll certainly let you know when she joins. But we do have a quorum, so we will proceed with the agenda. Today, the Commission will be holding a public hearing to review applications in accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, including the subsequent amendments for conducting this meeting online, which is, say, over Zoom. To ensure public access to the deliberations of Beacon Hill Architectural Commission, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing, in other words, over Zoom. In case you missed it, this hearing is being recorded, so all further conversations between commissioners should be audible to the public in attendance until the hearing is adjourned. At this point, we like to acknowledge any media or elected officials that may be present in the hearing. I am just looking. Dan Murphy from the Beacon Hill Times. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining. Any other media or elected officials, please raise your hand like Dan just did so we can find you. Nick's got to run the microphones here, so we need to turn you on. Okay, we don't see any, but by all means, elected officials or other members of the media, if you are here, don't be shy, just raise your hand and we will certainly acknowledge you to the group. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment on applications and discussions. And we're going to do that while we adjudicate each item on the agenda. At a certain point, we will let you know when it's time, the designated time, to take public comment, and then and only then, if you like, you can be heard on the record. In order to do that, however, you will need to raise your hand in the Zoom using the button presumably at the bottom of your Zoom panel that hopefully says raise hand, rather than simply waving your hand in front of the camera, because there's a lot of folks on the call and Nick might miss you if you just do that. So please, when the time comes, we'll give you a heads up that it's time for public comment. And then if you want to be heard on the record, raise your hand in the Zoom to do so. And we'll repeat the instructions if needed. Okay, with that out of the way, we are ready to begin. We've got a couple of violations on the agenda to start. There's some handy information about the Zoom controls if you're not familiar with it. There should be a thing that looks like a hand that says raise hand, and that's what you want to, the button you want to push when the time comes. Again, we'll give you the heads up in advance. Okay, so first item on the agenda under the violation review. Oh, I'm sorry, this is postponed, right, Nick? Okay, so let's just let the record reflect that we will defer ratification of the public hearing minutes from April 2026 to next month. Now then, moving on to violation review, the first item under that part of the agenda is 106 Cambridge Street, and I'm just going to get my handy agenda here. That's Gilmar De Silva. Is Gilmar or another representative? There's, I see a hand up, John Silka. Are you seeing that, Nick?
Yep.
Are you representing from 106 Cambridge Street?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, John, for coming in. Is it just you, or is there anyone else that needs to have their mic turned on?
Just me. And I have Rick Lorette here with me as well. He helped apply for the permit and everything.
Okay, very good. Thank you for coming in. Just for clarity's sake, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is, in the first instance, we are reviewing a violation that's been issued, but also we will at the same time hear an application for a ratification of an application to correct the violation. Is that right, Nick?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So this, oh, thank you, Nick. So this is the sign in question here, John, and I understand you have a proposal to revise the sign. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And by way of context, this is the address is 106 Cambridge Street, but this is the corner business on the corner of Bowden Street and Cambridge?
Yes.
Okay, for members of the public who may not be familiar with it, this is now in the historic district because the historic district was recently extended all the way out to the curb or to the facade of the buildings on Cambridge Street. And so that's why we are hearing this today. John, do you want to just take us through a quick summary of what you're proposing to revise the signage that's the subject of
Yeah.
the violation?
Yeah, so once we found out it was under violation, we immediately went and took down the signage and applied for the new plan. So basically, the back plating of it would be wood. All of the letters would be wood, and everything would be hand painted.
Okay,
Um,
very good. So it's wood letters on a wood board, basically.
Wood board, exactly. And then if it's allowed with you guys, we would like to work with an electrician to add gooseneck lighting to add some light so it brings attention to the sign. And that would be done with an electrician. They would apply for an electrical permit separately. And that would be done at a later date. We would just work with an electrician to do that.
Okay, and do you have I have seen the application, but can you just remind us, maybe it's on another slide, do you have a plan that shows where the lights would go as you've proposed them?
I do not have a plan that shows where the lights would go. We can provide that afterwards. I assume it would be probably 3 lights just left, center, and to the right of the sign, just to kind of light up the entire sign.
Okay, Nick, just for our own edification here, just make sure we get this right procedurally. What exactly is in the application with respect to the lights?
Yeah, it does have the request to put up the new wood sign as well as the gooseneck lights. So they
Right.
do have the diagram of the goosenecks, but they don't have their precise location. So I think if we approve this application, we can stipulate where we would like them and then have them submit final drawings to reflect their exact locations.
Okay, and I think at least I would be comfortable having you just to delegate that final approval to you.
Yeah.
If we just stipulate, we've got the design of the things, we know, or we can talk about how many of them there are and where they would go, at least into a first approximation, above, below, whatever. Okay, okay, so this is where the signs would go now. John, am I right that you are proposing, consistent with the sign you've got there now or put up there previously, you'd want signs on both faces of the building, the Cambridge Street side and the Bowden Street side?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and that they would be identical?
Exactly.
Right. Okay, there would be lights on both sides or just one side?
Both sides, ideally, is what we'd like to do.
Okay. Now, it may just be because of the way this is the angle of this photo or the way it's rendered, but are the signboards, the white portion are those equal sizes or is the Cambridge Street side shorter?
I believe they're equal sizes. I think it's just the angle of the image itself there. Right
Yeah.
there, it looks like they're about the same size now.
Okay. Oh, so this is an actual photo, or this is you.
This is the Google Street View.
Right.
Sometimes
Okay.
it gets a little bit like blurry or it warps the image a little bit, but it's
Right.
I believe both sides are the same size.
Okay, and so the white portion that we see here, your signboard would go on top of that, or is it just the letters that go on top of that?
No, we would cover that with wood to kind of like it would kind of match better with what the side paneling is there, and then we would put the wood letters on top painted.
Okay, would the wood board fill the opening that's white now?
Correct. I believe so. Yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
it's going to be exactly like that or if it's going to. I'd go based off of what's here. I don't know if the wood board would fill in. If you guys wanted us to fill it in, I think it'd look better that way, and then we can just apply the sign on top of that.
Okay, I think probably something like that, or to leave a consistent reveal all the way around if it doesn't fill it, but we can worry those details in a moment. I just want to make sure we're all clear as to what's proposed. Commissioners, any questions just for the moment about exactly what's proposed here? Okay, hearing none, why don't we go ahead and take public comment? So this is your heads up if you want to be heard on the record. Again, what you'll need to do is just press the raise hand button at probably the bottom of your Zoom panel. Nick's going to need to unmute you, so make sure you press that button and Nick will unmute you in turn.
First up we have is Rochelle. Rochelle, go ahead.
Hi, Beacon Hill Civic Association. We do not oppose the proposed sign as it is appropriate for the facade and satisfies guideline I-5. We oppose the gooseneck lights as guideline I-12 notes exterior illumination is discouraged. though they are somewhat common and if placed in a more traditional location above the sign, could be acceptable and satisfy guideline E6. End of comment.
Thank you, Rochelle. Okay, Mark, there's no other public comment, so we can turn it back to you and close the public comment portion of this application.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. So I think we've got sort of two questions here we need to resolve. One is the sign itself, and the other is the lighting. Let me just say, in the first instance, with respect to the request for two signs, normally, John, for your benefit, our guidelines on the city sign code, I believe, in fact, limit flat signs or belt signs like this to one per business. There can be more than one on a building, but they're generally limited to one per business. However, in this particular circumstance, which is rare, as you might imagine, this is maybe the one place where we've made an exception, where you have a building on the corner with two faces. So one example that comes immediately to mind is the Museum of African American History, which is on the corner of Smith Court and Joy Street. That has signs on both faces of the building, as one example, that are identical
Gotcha.
and otherwise conform with our guidelines and so forth. And importantly, I think for this purpose, that building, like this one, has it's not like one side of it is just a blank wall or something like that. Both sides of that building, Museum of African American History, are sort of activated toward their respective streets, and people approach from different sides and so forth. And so in those cases where such a circumstance exists, we have allowed an exception to the one sign per business requirement for flat signs. The materials appeared to be appropriate. They're wood, after all, and just painted and so forth. So personally, I'm fine with both the replacement signage and the fact that there are two, because this again is the one exception we've made to that particular guideline with respect to belt signs. Commissioners, before we move on to the lighting, any dissenting views from that appraisal? Okay, let's move on then to the lighting. So likewise, John, our guidelines do say, as Rochelle from the Civic Association mentioned, that exterior lighting of signs is discouraged. However, as she also pointed out in her comments, you do find a number of signs that are illuminated in the historic district. And this is something indeed that we have approved even relatively recently. I won't speak for my colleagues here, but I have found it useful where we're thinking about proposals to illuminate signs to distinguish businesses in particular that clearly benefit from the signage being illuminated, and specifically those that are open for a decent portion of their operating hours in the evening when it's dark. And I take it that is true of your business, John?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Could you just not that the exact details of the opening hours are in our jurisdiction or bear on directly on our adjudication of these things, but just tell us, what are the hours?
I don't know the hours of this particular business, but I assume they must be between 9 and 9 p.m.
Yeah, they're open late at night, yeah, or later at night. Okay, that's all I really needed to know. And then I think so. The question is lights or no lights, and if we allow lights, what should they be? I think this is certainly a kind of, if we are to contemplate lights here, what we would the direction we would go in. Again, not to speak for Rochelle or the Civic Association here, but I think her comments, to paraphrase perhaps grossly, were to the effect of, well, if you were going to do lights, you might think of something like this. John, what we're really trying to avoid, candidly, is what you had there before, where the sign is internally illuminated, which, of course, outside of historic district is a perfectly reasonable and common approach to these things. You want it to be very visible and so forth. It's just that's not really in keeping, of course, with the historic character of the neighborhood. But this kind of illumination, which is much more common, a simple lamp, incandescent lamp facing the sign is, I think, what we would entertain, again, if we're comfortable with it. So commissioners, with respect to the lighting as well, I think because, again, this is a business that is going to be open at night, and this is the type of lighting that if we were to contemplate it, is the kind of thing I think we would want to see. I think I'm okay with it. I think I would just want to have a better sense of exactly where the lights are going to go. I think we're talking about above the sign clearly, to make sure that architecturally speaking, they're mounted in an appropriate way in the facade, and their number, because I can't tell from this diagram how big they are relative to the sign. And I personally would be okay, again, to recap, with the lighting, with the gooseneck lighting above the sign, but I would also want, I think, to delegate the exact number and their placement to Nick, so he can go and look at it if necessary and get a sense for the scale of these things. Perhaps, I think we'd require them to submit a drawing that affirms all that, because I just want to make sure they're not too big for the space or for the sign. I've been talking a lot. Commissioners, any of your thoughts, please?
I like the gooseneck lamp idea. It's great. And I think that this is our chance to kind of set a precedent that's actually a good thing.
For Cambridge Street, yeah.
Yes, you know, a way for us to have a bit of a guideline, because this is something new to us to some extent. So I think that that's a good idea. And as far as how many lights on that side, I mean, this is the old Dunkin' Donuts, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's been a number of things, I think, over the years, but yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking no more than 3.
Yeah,
If to me, that makes, I think 4 would be overkill. Depending upon how bright the light is, you could possibly do 2. But that's the most opinion I have on that. I pretty much agree with everything you said.
okay, yeah, and I was thinking, like, in terms of the number 2, if I think, maybe 3 smaller ones might be better than 2 bigger ones or something, but I'm happy to leave that to Nick, just to
Yes.
make sure that it looks good when it's done. And again, understanding that the design of these things will follow this diagram. They're gonna look, the gooseneck lights are gonna look like this, what we're looking at. Just want to make sure they're not too big, and that we don't put more than we need on there. Nick, are you comfortable with having that delegated to you?
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Ralph or anyone else, has Commissioner?
I
Gibbon
agree.
joined in?
I agree with your strategy.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just want to make sure I don't see Commissioner Gibbon yet, although I don't. Okay. Let's see. Unless there's any further discussion, I will move that the violation be dismissed and the application be approved as submitted with the following provisos. Number 1, with respect to the belt signs, that the exact dimensions of the sign board. Sorry, Nick, I want to leave this to you as well. Be confirmed in advance with staff, specifically with respect to the nature and extent, if any, of any reveal around the outside of the signboard and the backing. And number 2, that likewise the size and placement of the gooseneck and exact placement of the gooseneck lamps, as well as their number, be delegated to staff with a drawing showing their size and placement upon that resolution submitted to staff in advance of construction.
I
Did I
second
miss
it.
Okay, thank you. Nick, did I miss anything?
No.
Okay, we will vote. Commissioner Allen.
Aye.
One last chance for Commissioner Gibbon. Don't see her. Okay, Commissioner Jackson
Aye.
and Commissioner Kiefer votes aye. John, thank you very much for coming in. You'll get a letter from Nick that outlines exactly what our determination, so you don't have to remember what we just said. And I just want to also, on behalf of the commission, thank you for your timely attention to this matter and your thoughtful resolution to it. It's a big improvement. It's very helpful. This is new in the historic district, and as Commissioner Allen said, it's very important for us that we have a good first impression with respect to the businesses and new applications on Cambridge Street. So thanks again for your hard work on this. Appreciate it.
So
Okay, thank you. Next is 88 Mount Vernon Street, which, quickly going back, is Anthony McDermott, I think. Anthony or any other representative from 88 Mount Vernon. Could you please raise your hand in your Zoom so Nick can find you and turn your mic on. Anthony McDermott, anyone from AMC Property Services for 88 Mount Vernon Street. I'm not seeing anyone.
Yeah, I know Anthony struggles with technology, so he may not be here.
All right, why don't we move on? And if he
Yeah.
does show up soon, we'll circle back to that one.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, next, onto design review portion of the hearing is 24 BRIMMER Street. I think I saw Bridget logging in earlier. Bridget, are you here? Or, and I see Amy's iPad. That might be Amy Ryan, the homeowner.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh, hi, Bridget. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I was trying to turn on my camera, but that's fine. I don't need it on. Okay, so I think Amy's here. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
I see Amy's iPad. Is that her?
That might be.
You see that one, Nick?
Yeah,
Yep.
she put her hand up, so that sounds like a signal.
Right.
Just requested for her to unmute.
Amy, if you want to unmute, you should be able to do that now. Maybe she doesn't need to unmute.
Okay.
Okay, Bridget, why don't you go ahead and we'll loop in Amy. If,
Oh yeah, Amy can. I know she's in Maine, so it may
Oh,
be
right.
a connectivity thing too.
Right.
So we're here with a previously approved proposal for the installation of a cast iron railing. Oh, there's Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Amy. Welcome. Thanks for joining.
And after we were given approval for this, we found that the baluster, the spindles that we had proposed to use were prohibitively expensive. We would have had to make a mold and have them made that way. And we found an alternate spindle. So that is what we're here to present. And I think, Nick, if you can, I think the first few pages are the original proposal. And then we get to a page that, so this is everything that was approved. And the thing that we're getting to is the next there, that's it, just to remind you all where it was. And then on the next page, keep going. There, this is the page that matters. We found a baluster that was very close in spirit and scale to what is there now, that is still being made. And the problem with the other one was that it was no longer being made and had to be recreated from scratch. So this is from Lawler Foundry. We are proposing, it has sort of a double torus, top and bottom. We are proposing removing one of them to make it more like the existing balusters. And otherwise, this is the closest we've been able to get to the heft and character of what's there now. So once again, we're not replacing what's there now. We're not replacing the balusters that you see in the photograph on the left, we are replacing the small wrought iron picket fence that was installed. And we're also replacing on one side the absence of railing altogether, and on the other side a railing that is made of a black painted 2x4, maybe 2x6. So that is our request for a modification of our original proposal. And just to give you a sense of it, having them made was going to triple the cost of what is already a very expensive railing. And as you know, the owners don't have to replace what's there, and they're spending a lot of effort and money to very much improve what's there. So
Okay, thank you, Bridget. Right, and further to that point, just for context, this was not long ago, but just so we remember. So what's on the left? So facing the house, what's on the left is what you see on the photo here, right? But what's
Yeah.
on the right is
yeah, could you flip back to that, Nick? There. So it's a low, very plain square section, maybe half-inch pickets, and then there was no railing at all going up to the front door. And the owners decided, Hal and Amy decided to install something that would make it somewhat safe. So what's there is, what has been a temporary substitution.
right. So the thing that's there now on the right, highlighted in red, is nothing like the one on the left, and is clearly a newer, non-original addition. Maybe for context as well. Well, actually, we'll come back to that in discussion. But the other clarifying question, if we can now go back to where we were, where you're showing what you're proposing.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a sense? So you said you're not going to use the Taurus on the top or bottom. Would you add a little plinth or whatever word that?
Yeah.
Yes, like a block there on the top and bottom. Yeah.
Yes, and that block would serve to allow us to change the height as it's going up the
right
railings as well. So we'd use the block exactly the way it's shown here.
And then again, just for the moment, as a clarification, since I appreciate you weren't necessarily trying, you're showing an image from a catalog, I presume, on the right. So I want to make sure we aren't led astray thinking it's a sort of smaller dimension or thinner or lighter than what's on the left. Can you give us a sense of the relative scale of what it would be compared?
It's very much the same. It's about 2 inches at the top and bottom, and about 4 inches in the middle. And the one on the left is I think it's a little bit more slender right before it hits the Taurus, and the middle part is the same.
Okay, and then finally, just one more question. The actual railing on the top. I don't think I see that here. Maybe I do. Oh, we do. Yes.
Yeah. So there it is. Yeah.
And same question in terms of is it the same profile? Is it the same basic dimensions, that kind of thing?
Well, what we've talked to the iron fabricator about with that is that the rail part from Lawler is a bit more slender, but we can add a flat stock at the beneath it to make up the heft of the original one. It may not be exactly the same profile when we're done, but we're using the parts that are available to make this work.
Right. So in general, the profile is consistent.
Yeah, it is consistent.
OG or whatever that word,
right.
Whatever the word is. Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's
right.
Up and over.
Okay. Right.
But I can go over all of this with Nick. Maybe if this is approved, we're going to be working with the iron fabricator to confirm all the details, and I can certainly keep Nick up to date on everything that happens there.
Great. Okay. Any other clarifying questions from the commission before we take public comment?
A question, are the heights of the railings on both going to be symmetrical?
Yes, they are. They are.
Your sketches show something diminutive on the right. So to my mind, what's most important is that the heights are the same.
Yes.
Given what your population might be like using the stairs.
Yes.
Older people are challenged, and it feels as if the more symmetry, the better.
Yeah, and to that point, we would the symmetry is certain. The height we will be able to fine tune with the use of the blocks that are top and bottom.
Right, right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you
Thank-
said that earlier, right? So you'll use that as a means, yeah, I get it, right? So in other words, the left one, which is existing, and the right one, which will be new, will be the same height
They
throughout.
will be the same height. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thank you, Ralph. Anyone else? Okay, why don't we go ahead and take public comment? Again, if you want to be heard on the record, please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your Zoom panel that says raise hand, and Nick will call on you in turn and unmute you.
Okay, first up we have is Rochelle. Rochelle, go ahead.
Beacon Hill Civic Association, we do not oppose, as we did not in November 2025, railings in a design matching sister buildings at 22 and 20 Brimmer Street as documentation and visible evidence satisfy guidelines A3 and F3. We oppose replacing railings in a new design not supported by similar evidence, as that would violate those same guidelines. End of comment.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Thanks, Rochelle. Anyone else?
All right, let me just double check. This is 24 Brimmer. And no other public comment, Mark, so we can close it for this application.
Okay, before we proceed, just one other important detail, clarifying point, Bridget. What we are looking at on the left, while it is the left side of the walkway to the subject property, importantly, that is the neighbor's house, correct?
That's right. Yes.
In other words, that is not the client's fence.
There is no balustrade, no cast iron balustrade on the owner's property.
Right. So their property is the brick you see at the lower right and right of that, the walkway, and then a fence, which is again a newer, clearly
Yeah.
not historic version. Thank you very much, Nick. There we go.
Right.
So
That's great. Yes.
yeah. So that's the subject property. That thing that Nick is highlighting there, that's the neighbor's fence. And the
Right.
reason it was originally contemplated, not to speak for Bridget here, but and jump in here if I mischaracterize this, but we don't know what the original fence for this house would have looked like. We can be confident, and one of the reasons we approved the prior proposal, this is a row of, you can see 4 of them here. It's at least 4, maybe it's 6 houses on this stretch of Brimmer Street that were clearly built at the same time in the same style. They have, importantly, some minor differences, not least of which are the fences. So there is a consistent treatment in all the other houses in that they have fences. And moreover, it is a consistent treatment in that the style of the fences is, generally speaking, similar. There's one that's not, for example. That's probably a newer one. They're not the same in terms of their height, and some have these spindles on the top, like that one, and then some don't, like that one. And so while the houses were clearly built at the same time in the same style, by the way, there are other minor deviations among the houses in the lintels and things like that you can see there. So the houses are not identical. And so because we didn't know what this fence would have looked like, because it's gone and there's no evidence for it, Bridget, I think quite reasonably said, well, what we could do as a reasonable defensible conjecture is just replicate the one next door. Again, we know just from looking at them that they're not all identical, but that's the closest one. And I think in the past, we have actually reviewed a number of times this exact circumstance of missing ironwork, for which we don't have a definitive historical record of what the pattern would be. In those instances, we have done what was proposed before, which is just to make the somewhat heroic but not unreasonable assumption that perhaps we'll just assume it's the same as the one next door. And so we approved that on that basis back in November. Bridget has now come back because, as she said at the outset, when they got a quote for it, it was incredibly expensive because the pattern doesn't exist. So my view of this is that that was a very reasonable approach. It's one that's consistent with what we've done before. But we don't know either that the fence next door was original, and moreover, more importantly, that the one that might have that did exist prior at the subject property was identical. What
Well,
we
the
do
way I
know-
look at it is just that what they've come up with, it looks so similar that I believe it's doable. Do you think it's doable? I think it is.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think what's most important, given what we have to work with here, which is a fair amount, but not quite enough to be certain of what it should be. What we have to work with here is the other fences. And to me, the threshold question is this consistent enough with the pattern, generally speaking, that exists, that is extant among the surviving, let's just call it historic fences. I say historic maybe in quotes because I don't mean original. We don't know if they're original or not. And to my eye, this meets that criteria. It's what there is a consistent pattern. Again, they're not the same scale, they're not the same height. Some have the spindles on the top, some don't. But what they have in common is this ornamental feature in the middle of each spindle, whatever. That is this. What would you call this pattern? It's a flower, basically, right, Bridget?
Yeah, it is a flower. Sometimes I've seen it called a double tulip. I've seen
Yeah.
it called a acanthus bud. I don't even know if that's something that exists, but sounds Greek.
Right. And I think I'm inclined to agree with my colleague, Commissioner Jackson, that notwithstanding the fact that we don't know that these two fences were identical, that the preservation of the symmetry, at least with respect to the neighboring building, I think, again, that's a reasonable conclusion, that these things, and I think it will just look better, to be candid. I think Commissioner Jackson, I don't want to speak for him, was speaking also to the accessibility features of this, but I
Yeah.
think it would also just look more appropriate if they are the same height.
I was stunned by the original proposal. It was so ambitious and exemplary.
Right,
Well,
right, yeah.
I'm very humbled coming back to you.
But I can understand being challenged cost-wise. So if one can maintain the composition and substitute a more modest rail, it's the scale of this sort of sequence of arrival, and looking at what is happening going up the stairs currently, I wondered how certain people were able to negotiate the stairs comfortably. So your proposal, to my mind, compositionally is the right thing to do. And if we have to change the railing type, the spindle type, so be it.
Yeah, great.
Okay, very good. And yeah, I think again, as a reminder, the applicant came to us with a proposal to replace the fence in the first instance back in November, and that is what they are seeking to do here. To replace this clearly non-historic, I dare say less architecturally significant or even architecturally interesting fence. Of course, they are always within their rights to do nothing. And so a proposal that would be prohibitively expensive to the point where they simply wouldn't do it would leave us in the condition, to insist on that would potentially leave us in the condition where we are now. And I will also say, for the record, emphatically, I believe this proposal is better than nothing. It's better than what's there, and it's certainly better than nothing.
Yeah.
But
I think we're all in agreement.
yeah,
Aren't we all in agreement?
I think so. Is that a motion, Commissioner Allen?
I motion to
Accept the
Approve.
proposal.
yes, I motion to approve as proposed.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Nick, did you need any further details in there?
Nothing. Nope, we're good to go.
Okay, very good. We will vote. It's been moved and seconded. Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
One more time, Commissioner Gibbon. I don't think she's here. Commissioner Kiefer votes aye. Okay, thank you very much. The application is approved. Thanks for coming back, and
Wonderful.
you'll get a letter from Nick. Amy, thanks again
Yeah,
to you as well.
thank
And
you for your
Hal, if you're there.
consideration. Okay, thank you for your consideration. It's very thoughtful.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Bridget.
Bye-bye.
Okay, next on the agenda is 250 Cambridge Street, which is, get my handy agenda here, Andy Fitz or someone from Project Expediters or anyone else representing 250 Cambridge Street. If you were here, Shane, is that 250 Cambridge Street? Nick,
Yes,
Shane Healy.
correct. Yes. Hi, how are you guys today?
Hi, Shane. Thanks for coming in. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Andy or Nick, could you, just in case they need to talk, unmute, give them the ability, Andy Fitz and Eric Metzger, just in case?
You got
That'd
it.
be great.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. And do I have the ability to share my screen?
I can give you that ability. Yes.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. And okay. You said Andy and who else?
Eric Metzger,
Eric. There he is. Okay.
please.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you much.
And I will stop sharing. Go ahead.
Andy and Eric, you might need to unmute yourselves if you need to talk, but you should be able to do that now.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, so this is the, my name is Shane Healy. I'm representing Core Estates Group, which is representing Chase Bank. We are proposing a new Chase Bank at the corner of Cambridge and Anderson Street. Sorry if I had to clear my throat a few times, and I'm getting over a sickness my son gave me. I got a couple of pictures just of the existing bank or the existing space as it is. Originally, it was a TD bank. It is now a vacant space. And then for the site, we are going to be doing a very little limit of work on the sidewalk to maintain or make the ADA compliance of that new entry, or well, existing entry to the bank. We were here a few months ago, so this is a modification to our proposed signage. This is what we sent you guys, and Nick brought to our attention that the Chase signs on the called the angled part of the awnings would not be approved, so we modified that to include the signage just on the valance. So we'll have 4 new awnings, 2 on this facade with 2 smaller Chase signs. And then we'll have 2 new awnings with the signage on the valance on the west elevation as well. There will be right here, we're going to utilize the existing structure for a new Chase blade sign. It will not be electrified. We are going to be reusing the existing structure of that sign. We will be adding in 3 exterior cameras that will be finished as black. 1 here between these 2 set of storefronts. 1 here in between these 2 set of storefronts. And then 1 here in the entry alcove.
Shane, sorry to interrupt, but
Yes, sir.
the sign and the cameras were already approved last time. I think we're only talking about the awnings. Sorry to, yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yep.
So yes, we have again, 4 new awnings. There'll be black awnings, non-illuminated signage on the valance of the 4 new signs.
Okay, including the one around the corner on Anderson Street.
Correct.
Yeah, could you just go back the prior one and just for our edification here, just zoom in on that lower right so we can see what it used to look like?
Sure.
I just want to give folks a little bit of context here. So that's the corner, that's Anderson Street going up to the right, and Cambridge Street on the left.
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt your flow there. Please go
Oh,
ahead.
you're fine. You're fine.
Or is that, or is that it?
Well, there was a couple other slight modifications from the original, and it was mainly so they've got new storefront systems. The change is going to be a different manufacturer, same look, same feel, just different manufacturer from what we originally proposed to you guys. And then same with the glass, will be a different manufacturer, but very same glass feel. So other than that, those are the only modifications from our original proposal.
Okay, are those ladder details, other than the awnings per Nick's point a moment ago, are those in this application? Or does the design change at all? If the manufacturer is just, you're just someone else making the same thing for you, then we don't.
Correct. Yep. The same. It's the same dimension, same look, just different manufacturer.
Oh, okay, yeah. Then
Yep.
that's, we don't need to concern ourselves with that.
Right. That's right.
Okay. Okay, so to recap, it's going to be awnings with the logos on the valances rather than signage, non-illuminated on both Cambridge Street and Anderson Street side, right? Okay,
Correct.
and they're on each awning, right? Okay. Commissioners, any clarifying questions before we take public comment? Okay, we'll go ahead and do that. Again, if you want to be heard on the record, please raise your hand in the Zoom using the button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Nick will call on you and unmute you.
Okay, first up is Rochelle. Rochelle, go ahead.
Beacon Hill Civic Association, we do not oppose the 4 proposed awnings as they are appropriate to the storefront and meet guideline A3, but having the name and logo on each does exceed the signage limitations of 2 per storefront in guideline I9. We would also note the large illuminated sign within the storefront is discouraged by guideline I12. End of comment.
All right, not
Thanks,
seeing any other
Rochelle.
public comment, Mark, so we can close it for this application.
Okay, thanks, Rochelle. Okay, so since we just talked about this in a prior application, this is that unusual circumstance where you have a building on the corner. So with respect, at least to the number, with respect to the number of signs, which is to say the number of awnings that have logos on them and are acting in lieu of signs. This is a corner building, and again, we just approved an exception to the normal sign guidelines a few moments ago, for this condition. So at least with respect to having logos on both sides of the building, I'm fine with that. You can see it as the prior condition as well. The TD, I think, did that predate the historic district, Nick? I don't remember how long that, yeah, it must have, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Now with respect to the multiple awnings, that is a condition that does exist elsewhere in the district, where you have larger storefronts like this. This is a huge building by Beacon Hill standards. And even this portion of it is quite a large storefront for Beacon Hill. Just a couple examples that come to mind. They're both ones where the storefronts are split by a door, but DeLuca's Market and then further down the Beacon Hill Wine and, I should know the name, but on the corner of Mount Vernon, Beacon Hill Wine and Spirits. Those are examples of businesses that have multiple shopfront windows, each with awnings, each with the name in lieu of signage of the business on the awning. So this is not unprecedented in the historic district. I say that just by way of example for the moment, but I think it is instructive for our deliberations in this case.
I mean, one of the things that we talked about earlier, even though it's not there anymore, was the old Dunkin' Donuts. Granted, that was on Cambridge Street, but that used to have awnings. So we have had awnings in our neighborhood that definitely had logos on them, or
For sure.
at least the names. So, I mean, I don't know about you. I don't have a problem with it. Does anybody have an issue with this?
I don't either. I didn't want to try to sound like I was persuading anyone, but trying to persuade anyone, but I am fine with it. I think the logos are reasonable in scale. They're small, they're confined to the valance rather than the top. wherein if they were on the top, the main part of the awning, they could be much larger. So I think they're pretty understated, all things considered, and I think maybe that's a consideration. The very fact that they are on the valance only restricts their size. And so when I think about the meaning, the spirit of the guideline that talks about the number of the signs, it's in proportion to the facade and meaning or in the context of the facade, both aesthetically, but also with respect to the work that the sign is doing to indicate the business. And so this is a much smaller sign more than once on the awnings. And so I think two small signs on just the valance, maybe are the equivalent size-wise. Frankly, it's smaller than if you had put a belt sign even over one of these windows.
Oh,
So,
I agree.
yeah.
Ralph, do you disagree, or are you in agreement, Ralph? What are your thoughts? Uh-oh.
You're muted, Ralph.
I think the signs and the architecture go together. There are 3 bays on the Cambridge Street and 2 bays on the side street, awning per bay. The Chase sign is so discreet. I'm not troubled by the scale and the repetition.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well,
Very
I
good.
mean, I motion to accept the application as submitted. I think that since they're doing it nice and a small scale, does anybody disagree?
No. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded to approve as submitted. We will vote. Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiefer votes aye. So the application is approved. You'll get a letter from Nick just affirming our determination. Any questions, please just feel free to follow up with Nick directly. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Okay, next is 48 Temple Street, which is Frank McGuire. I think I saw Frank earlier. Yes, there's Frank.
There he is. All right, Frank, you should be able to
Oh,
unmute.
there's 2 Franks. There's a Frank and a Frank McGuire Architects. Is it?
Well,
which one
they
are you?
asked me how I would like to appear, and I had a moment of excitement and put my name in. So this is an interesting question because it's a little public space. And my clients who own the house to the south of the space have an L. It's essentially a building that I suspect was never seen before the park took place. And I don't know the age of the park, but it's the kind of little outbuilding. It's barely really it's more of a shed. It's not the kind of extension that you would find on a Beacon Hill house that is a masonry element, an L. It's really a little appendage on the back. It's wood frame, and significantly, it doesn't appear to have a substantial foundation. So one of the issues that came about was if we were to give it a new cladding, it seemed like the cladding, first of all, would have to be lightweight enough so that it would not drag this little thing down with it in terms of just physically. And also, it seemed like there were a couple of options that are sanctioned by other locations on the hill that we might explore. I understand from our clients went first to Nick, and he expressed the view, which I can imagine is entirely rational, that a wood clapboard for this little element would be favorably looked upon. At the same time, the clients both felt that perhaps it could be something else in light of the fact that the opposite one is masonry, a more significant material, and the buildings across on the other side of Temple Street are more substantial, and that to introduce a little wood clapboard into this situation on a permanent basis it wasn't really giving the right honor to the park. So we began to talk about that, and because of the foundation issues and the fragility of this little extension, metal panel was what we thought we would want to discuss with you. And by metal panel, we meant really something that's commonly used on Beacon Hill in various locations, standing seam copper, or not so commonly, but sometimes used to be lead-coated copper. We can't do that anymore, so now we would use a standing seam zinc. The advantage of the zinc was that it has a gray sort of background character that rather matches some of the paneling and metalwork on the larger buildings across Temple Street. So there was some coherence in the way things looked. And so while we understand that one might easily say, okay, let's have it clapboard, because certainly there are clapboard buildings that are on the public veneer. That's the painted wood clapboard option. Obviously, we could paint it in conjunction with the recommendations of the commission and staff. I do want to point out that there's a rather unsightly wooden railing on top, and this, you can see the overlay here, what's behind. That there is no deck there. This little thing can't probably support a deck, and there is no deck. But since the railing is there and it does obscure various things looking back towards the backs of these other buildings, it seems like to replace it, matching on the other side where there's an existing iron railing of the type that's commonly approved in the district. The proposal in this case, alternate one, is to clapboard it, paint it some color, add vertical granite panels at the base, which would be thin set, so that they could really sit on some kind of little curb, and we wouldn't have to invade the entire framing system of the structure to re-support it. So that's alternate one. You got all there you go. So alternate two is a standing seam and straightforward. This happens to be a zinc natural finish. And the idea is that it does weather to some degree. It retains a metallic character throughout. That might turn out to be not a great selling point for it. But again, the other conditions remain the same. We're just replacing it with which is a lightweight, permanent. This is practically immortal, this material, and it solves many of the interior and weathering issues that this little L has struggled with over the years. So that's alternate two. Alternate three is standing seam copper, which, as we know, is quite common through the hill. It will begin, and I'm going to leave out the question of whether it's treated in any way, but that it will ultimately never be the cheerful green within any of our lifetimes going forward. And with the atmospheric conditions we now breathe in and out, it's not likely that it'll ever be there. It could be treated to be that way, but we don't subscribe to that in terms of handling copper. It will be brown, and it'll ultimately get browner and more backgroundy, and the brown would be in some ways coherent with the brick of the existing house and the brick of its compatriot across the park. And so it strikes me in my particular opinion of this that the copper is probably the best thing to do. And but we obviously lay this at your feet and ask the commission what you think.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Just can we go back to alternative one for just a second? I just want to make sure, because I've had the benefit of looking at this and talking it through with Nick. Just to avoid any confusion, this is the clapboard alternative, and what looks like squares here is simply what you've drawn in horizontal lines for the clapboards over the existing
That's correct. I mean, it would be
vertical boards.
It would be. I didn't realize they would show up this strongly.
Right.
We did want to reflect them as overlays, but if you look at the part that's shaded, anyway, it'll be a simple clapboard, 5 inches to the weather, 5.5 inches to the weather, wood with pilasters on the corners and a little cornice board. And again, we think we can still do this little foundation, which we need to do anyway, just to do a little bit of fortification of the foundation against some of the inhabitants of the park. So we want to do that anyway. But yeah, this is the clapboard option is the one that I know was first advanced in the discussions that my clients had with Nick.
Great, thank you. Okay, commissioners, any other clarifying questions about what's proposed before we take public comment on this? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and take public comment. If you want to be heard on the record, please raise your hand in the Zoom using the button at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and Nick will unmute you.
Okay, first up is Rochelle with the Civic Association. Rochelle, go ahead.
Beacon Hill Civic Association, we do not oppose replacing the cladding, and of the options put forth, replacing in kind with wooden shiplap would be most appropriate to meet guideline A2 and A3. Historic maps date this brick townhome's wooden rear L to the 1880s when the existing shiplap was most popular. Copper and zinc standing seam panels were historically applied to roofs. A brick base for the wall would be more appropriate than granite to satisfy guideline A3, as the rest of the building is brick. Additionally, we would ask that the applicant further demonstrate the condition is beyond repair to meet guideline A1. End of comment.
Thank you, Rochelle. Mark, I'm not seeing any other public comments, so we can close this portion of the application.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. On the last point, Frank, this thing is pretty beat up at this point, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it not only is it beat up, but there's a significant weathering problem. You can see actually on this and any of the other photographs that there's all sorts of material hanging out of the below the cladding, insulation and other stuff that is impacted by moisture and mold, and it really needs to be fixed in terms of sealing it off and rendering it inert in terms of those things. This isn't just an aesthetic desire. So the whole purpose of this is to remove the existing material, clean and add, if necessary, to the framing that's behind, new sheathing and insulation and waterproofing and flashing, so that what foundation there isn't any further undermined by weather impact. So there's a practical reason for doing this, no matter what aesthetic we use for the cladding.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And let's see. A basic question, and forgive me if you said something to this effect at the outset, but what, if anything, do we know about what this thing was and when it was built?
I don't have any information about its history. It's what I think, based on the number of these things that we've encountered over the years, is that I don't know when the park was created. Perhaps someone can tell me that. I don't know if Nick looked into that, or I have not. But this kind of structure was in the backyards of lots of Beacon Hill houses. And in many cases, it simply abutted someone else's garden or another shed on someone else's property. And it was never built, as you might see an L on Chestnut or Mount Vernon Street, as a masonry extension to put in a kitchen or a ballroom or some other major functional appurtenance to the house. It's basically a pantry. And it contains storage for materials. It's really, I mean, in the sense, it's habitable in the sense that it meets the definitions of habitable space, but nobody there's no functional use of it other than the space is needed for storage and for material and equipment. And so I suspect that it might not have ever meant to be exposed.
Right, and so, to put it maybe more directly, this was part of the house, not a shed, let's say. So it was more than a shed, modest perhaps in its construction, but meant to be functional as part of the house.
Well, I would reverse that. I think it was not a part of a house. It was a shed. Who knows
Yeah.
what was in it over the years, but in other words, it isn't a room added. It isn't a dining room, a sitting room, servants' quarters, whatever you might consider was the reason to put an addition on any one of the hundreds of Beacon Hill houses that have additions, and you can see it right there in what Nick has brought up.
Yeah,
But-
and okay, sorry, go ahead.
But but this is really kind of just a shed, and I think that's the best definition of it, because it's not living space. It's just a place where things are stored.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so maybe I was using the word shed a little too narrowly, but it was, so you're saying it's closer to a shed.
It's not an
than
extension of the mason
yeah.
volume of the house.
Right. Okay. So what I was trying to get at is Rochelle in the Civic Association's comments mentioned the copper and zinc standing seam panels were historically applied to roofs. That's of course where we see that treatment generally. And at the same time, just a casual stroll down Cedar Lane Way is where you'd find shiplap, but in that case, really as fencing rather than the exterior of something you'd call a building. In I think generally speaking, what I do recall, and I think is reflected on this map, if I understand the color coding correctly, is that what is now the park used to be two wood frame buildings of
that's
18th
correct, Mark.
century vintage that burned, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I think I'm sympathetic to the clapboard approach. Not knowing, it sounds like we don't know, and we don't have a way of knowing for sure what material would have originally been. I think it's fair to say, Frank, whatever is on there now, the exterior cladding is not the original, right? Are we agreed on that?
Correct. Yeah, I think that's right, Mark. I guess that where we departed from the initial thinking about clapboard was simply that I think you could make a very straightforward argument that says that clapboard buildings were there. Clapboard buildings were torn down. Clapboard is used in various locations in Beacon Hill, including some fairly public clapboard buildings that are of historical significance, such as at the corner of Pinckney. But the other way to look at it is that a public space was created, and that public space relates to the very elegant and unusual rear facade of the church and buildings of some materiality now enclose and abut that space, and the space is treated quite seriously architecturally as a little pocket public park. And the one place in the surround of this public space that is of a material that's to some extent not coherent with that space is this little L. And that's why I think we departed a little bit from, clapboard was there. You didn't see this, but clapboard was there somewhere, so this should be clapboard. And it's not an unreasonable argument. I want to advance the alternative because I know that I feel that there's something to be said for the fact that this is a public space of some interest.
Right, okay. Let's see. Maybe to take the easier thing first, I think with respect to the granite panels at the bottom, let me just ask, since we've got it on the screen here, again, you've drawn in the seams between these things just to illustrate that these would be veneer panels rather than big blocks and so forth.
Correct.
But presumably you wouldn't see those joints so much.
No.
Yeah.
I drew them specifically for that. Thank you for observing that. That's exactly right. We have no foundation under this thing to speak of. And the act of uncovering and adding to it and strengthening whatever is in there might eliminate the whole problem because the thing is so old and fragile. There's a certain sensitivity to fixing this up, and that's why we want to do it one way or another in a light-handed way. But it did seem that where this material, whatever it may be, meets the earth, it ought to meet the earth differently. And a half-inch or three-quarter-inch granite panel seemed like a better way to do that than a brick knee wall. Because again, we've encountered some of the issues of creating a foundation for that knee wall, which would then run down, I'm afraid, into frost wall conditions and get below where we want to be in relation to the condition of the L as a whole.
Right. And speaking of which, I meant to ask, so you don't have an alternative that effectively replaces what's there, right? With this sort of vertical shiplap. And can you just speak to that? Was that simply an aesthetic choice, or is that sort of problematic given that this thing, again, let's call it a shed, but it is now functioning as, I would understand, it's something that needs to be, sealed to the weather and so forth. Can you just speak to why you're not proposing to replace kind of what's there?
Well, I think first of all that, I think what's there is some variant of texture 111. And so it's a modern material. It's not an elegant old barn siding of some kind from way back when.
Right.
And it's basically that seems like that would even further kind of dishonor the relationship between this piece of facade and the space that it looks out on, and that people in that space look around at the entourage of the park. That we just felt it ought to be one way or another a better material.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I guess so. We don't know what this would have been originally. We can, I think, reasonably assume, given its construction, that it's a wood frame structure, that something like wood would be at least generally appropriate here. I will say, from my part, commissioners, I think I'm more inclined to favor the clapboard solution rather than the standing seam metal. And maybe that's just because in my mind, I can't kind of get away from the image of the standing seam metal being used on rooftops and head houses. And and so forth. And as such, it's rather industrial quality, for lack of a better term. And moreover, given that, as Frank said, the copper version would not likely weather in our lifetimes, I think I'm reluctant, even more reluctant as a result, given that consideration. I, for my part, kind of like these little architectural anomalies that pervade particularly these kinds of spaces at the backs of buildings and so forth. I was on the garden tour today, so we saw a bunch of them. So I'm not particularly troubled by the discontinuity in materials between the brick and then what would be wood and then what would be granite on the rear facade of the church. And I appreciate the attempt to try to harmonize this with its surroundings and relate to the modern building across the street. But I guess I'm again more inclined to want to relate it to the past of this space rather than the present, which I guess again is why just understanding that there would have been wood frame, likely clapboard buildings on this spot earlier in its lifetime. But Commissioners Allen and Jackson, do you have other views, please?
If I'm standing on Temple Street looking into the park, to my mind, the building to the left downplays its significance. It's understated. The L is understated. It's anonymous. So I'm concerned that looking to the right, suddenly this L, if we took any of the more elaborate facade expressions, are meant to draw attention to itself rather than suppressing its identity. So I'm most in favor of the clapboards painted dark and taking an unassuming role, replacing the facade, but taking a less assuming role about its significance in light of the chapel dominating the park, and that's the focus materially, and suppressing what's happening on the right to give prominence to the center.
Kind of make it go away, so to speak.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. Yeah.
I was wondering what the existing condition looks. I didn't look that closely at the way the L meets the ground. So the introduction of this rather high granite base seems atypical of L additions. So I'm wondering what the typical way in which a wood framed L meets the ground and handles the concern for wet water and what have you. So
it would have been brick. And I would expect, and it would have been a brick foundation wall, which I'm sure is the case across the way. Again, the structural technical issues led us to this thought. I will say that the word thin brick crossed our minds, but was summarily rejected.
Well, where I would go with it. Okay, so if you need to introduce granite, can it be 6 inches of granite rather than? It looks pretty heroic now in terms of its scale. So can we be more modest? But I don't know.
I think we could detail it that way because it responds to the floor level of the building, of the shed inside. So sure, we could clad past that, since it's a cladding and not a support system. We could clad or clapboard or whatever past that and have a less monumental stone strip. along the point where it meets the ground.
Yeah, so I would, to my mind, that would be the more appropriate solution, and let the stone of the church be the dominant sort of moment in the space, material moment, and suppress the notion that craft is informing your L with copper and all the more elaborate materials, but keeping it anonymous and dark.
And Frank or Nick, can you remind us, and forgive me if somebody already mentioned this, where is the limit of the public way here? Is it Temple Street or is this park?
The
I
park
forget.
the park is city owned, so it's the park itself.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so because from Temple Street, you're probably not going to see much of that portion of the wall close to the ground. But again, thank you, Nick, for confirming. You can actually, our purview is right up close, so it does matter. Okay, Arian, any thoughts, comments, questions, objections?
I actually, I think I'm going definitely with what Ralph was saying about having the, how'd you put it, Ralph? Having the, stone.
Suppress it as an architectural feature.
Make it kind of go away.
Yeah.
So you don't really notice it so much.
Yeah, I was having trouble hearing you, Aaron. Maybe it's just my microphone is fuzzy.
Well, yeah, I know you get echoing a lot, so I'm not too sure.
Yeah, there are two of me. I
Mute-
tried to
mute one of
stack
you.
the meeting.
Thanks for bringing both of you.
Right. Well,
The
Arian,
other guy's horrible. You don't even want to hear
right.
from him.
Right.
Is this any better, guys? Can you hear
That
me?
is better.
Yes, thank you.
Cool beans. So, yeah, I think the idea of just making it more, just following behind. There was a wording that you put it, Ralph, and I was like, yes. So Ralph's wording, I support it. I have nothing against this.
Okay, thank you, Arian. So to move us toward a motion here, one thing that's not specified in the application is the paint color. Again, for the alternative that specifies wood, which would be painted. I like the direction that Commissioner Jackson has suggested, because I had independently been thinking sort of the same thing. I think when I was talking to Nick about this, I said something even to the effect of you could even just paint it black or something, but I'm not sure that it needs to be that. But I wonder if the consensus is that the clapboard option is preferred, and moreover, that making this as innocuous as reasonably possible, to in my paraphrase of Ralph's comments, quote, make it go away, that we could, if you guys are comfortable with this, delegate the final approval of the paint color, if Nick is comfortable with it, to Nick with that guidance, that it would be something that's appropriate, but meant to minimize the visual impact of the structure.
I mean, I agree with that. Does Nick?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Ralph, how about you? Are you okay?
Yeah.
leaving it to Nick
Am
with
I
the color?
mute? Yes, I agree.
Okay. So I think we've got a consensus. I don't want to cut off the discussion here, but if we think, unless there's further comments, I'll make a motion.
Make a motion.
Okay, thank you. I will move that the application be approved with the following provisos. That number one, that I believe what's referred to as alternative one be executed, which is to say specifically a wood clapboard treatment. That number two, that the granite base of the structure be reduced in height, and to reduce its prominence and visual impact. And that third, the paint color, the final paint color for the clapboards be delegated, choice of the final paint color and approval of the final paint color for the clapboards be delegated to staff with the guidance that the color be historically appropriate, but also having the effect of minimizing the prominence, visual impact of the structure to quote unquote make it go away.
I
Anything else?
second that.
Okay, was that a second?
That's a second.
Okay, Nick, is that enough detail for you?
Yeah, of course, I'll consult with the applicant as well.
Right.
But yes, for
Yes.
color. Yep.
Great. Yes, great. Thank you. Okay, we will vote on the motion as moved and seconded. Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
and Commissioner Kiefer votes aye. So, Frank, you know the drill, but you'll get a letter from Nick, and we can follow up with him on the details. Thank you very much for coming in.
Indeed.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, Frank.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Okay, finally, I believe, 155 to 159 Charles Street, which is the roadie folks. I see the general roadie Zoom. We probably have a couple of other folks. Let's just find them here.
So I think William is on. This is Ruthie and Eric behind the generic roadie photo. We can't turn our video on, but we're happy to if you want to enable us.
There you
Hi,
go.
Ruthie and Eric. Thanks for joining. And William, I saw as well. Is William turned on? There's William. Hi, William. Thanks for coming.
Hello.
Okay, so we have come a long way on this, and but we're not quite done. So we had denied without prejudice a couple of the details last time. Do you want to, Ruthie or Eric or whoever wants to go first, just quickly recap where we are and bring us up to speed as to what we're talking about tonight and your revised proposal?
Yes. Nick, would you like me to share screen?
That would be the easiest way of going about it. So let me, I'll stop and you guys should be okay.
Perfect. Hold on, let me go to presentation mode. Whoop. Here, okay, so thank you, Mark. We're excited to be back. It's been a great process. This is our shortest presentation to date. So, you know, I think coming off of being approved for the majority of the design last meeting, there were 4 specific items that we were asked to take a look at. One was the cornice, which the comments from last meeting were that it was overly expressive and to reduce the amount of shadowing. The second was the soffit transition at level 2, looking to simplify that geometry. The third was the signage. We had some vertical pier signs that we were to replace with blade signs. And the fourth was the lighting, which we came with some concepts and a couple options, and we've refined for this proposal. So I'll just run through these 4 items and then happy to take any questions. So the cornice here, we now have 3 versions to show you because the first one was referenced in last meeting. So we originally had 2 flush soldier courses for the brick cornice. In the last meeting, we showed taking those 2 soldier courses and recessing every other course. This is recessed an inch here, also having a band of a single brick underneath and then a recess of 2 bricks here. And so the comments that we got were that it felt a little bit too, I think, hairy might have been a word used, but a little too expressive in terms of the shadowing. And so we did look at a number of different options and ended up coming back to kind of the discussion we had last time, which was referencing that there was something strong about the first one. And I know we've heard some comments that having a little more detail on the second one was helpful. So we ended up figuring out that the best solution to recommend is meeting it somewhere in the middle. So still recessing every other brick course, but doing it not as dramatically, so half the depth. So you can see here, these are of course renderings, and this is something that will be mocked up on our mock-up that we shared last time, but kind of being in the middle of these 2. So getting a little bit more depth and detail than we had in the original option, but calming it down a little bit from the previous. So that's our proposed update on the cornice. Then soffit and signage. So the conversation on the soffit, which you can see the previous version here on the left, was that the stepping we were doing had a lot of curved elements in it and was feeling a little too referential to an interior molding. And I believe the comments were to kind of simplify, make it a little crisper and a little more architectural. So we've changed it to a more rectangular stepping transition. It still goes around the curve to help transition from what's happening at the curve to the soffit above, but a little bit crisper. And then the other difference you can see here is we had these vertical pier signs that we had integrated in the previous design, and the discussion was to have more blade signs on Cambridge Street along with the signage bands, to not have any of the pier signs, and to kind of set up the language of moving towards Charles Street. So we've made those updates. Jumping to another view here. And again, this is how we're designing the overall signage to fit in and integrate with the building. Of course, when a particular retailer comes in with a particular setup, they'll come back to the commission for approval on the actual signage. But we included a little detail here, a black metal band that would wrap the signage, that would tie into the coursing of the terracotta facade module, and be something that would feel integrated into the building. Also showing here a little detail of the granite edge and the transition from the terracotta panel here with a little reveal down to the granite that is underneath the storefront as well, protecting for weather and snow, etc. So another view, these are just similar views that we had shown in the previous presentation. You can see the updated soffit elements and the updated signage here. And then moving on to lighting. So last time we brought a couple options, and we've been considering this and really wanted to tone it down to what is, we think, the simple, effective lighting to have for this project. So we're proposing, similar to what we had last time, lighting on the signage band above the retail entries. There likely won't be 3 retail entries. These are just showing the potential locations that we'll be planning for. And then overall, a soffit light incorporated in a recess so that it won't be very visible. The light source won't be visible to sight, but it'll light underneath the soffit and the ground floor level entering the retail. And so we have a couple of precedents on the bottom from Lamb, our lighting designer. This is not about the type of light that is being used. So for example, the Envoy Hotel light, you won't be able to see the downlights like you can here. It's more about the light levels that these projects are achieving will be similar to the light levels that we're achieving. The whole system will also be on dimmers, so it can be adjustable, and just make it very clear we are not referencing the signage lighting as our precedent for the Envoy Hotel. And then as you move around the building, we talked about this last time and got positive feedback, so there's no changes here, but we are proposing catenary fixtures going down Silver Place. And doing a simple, smaller fixture that matches between having something that has a historic element to it and something that feels a little simpler and more contemporary. You can see the fixture here on the right. And so that, just jumping back to a corner shot, is kind of the summary of those 4 items. And just to reiterate, where we are at in the design process, we'll be working through all of our construction details going forward to be reviewed with Nick before we would go for our building permit. And we also have a mock-up that we presented last time that will be part of those construction details that will have all these elements of the facade in full scale for each of the elements, but smaller together so that we can all review them. So.
Great, thank you very much, Ruthie. Anyone else have anything from the team that wants to get an order in here before we press on?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, William. Ruthie, just one very quick clarifying question. If we can go back to the lighting, that one, I just want to confirm because I'm not sure it's doing justice to what you're proposing. The upper left image, that's simply a light from above that's washing applied signage, right? In other words, it looks almost as if the sign is internally lit or something, the one that says signage, right? That's just what you're showing there is an external light that's above that's just washing the front of the sign, and by virtue of the fact that it's on this soffit and there's no building underneath it, as it were, you don't see the wash continuing down the facade, right?
Yes, so it's actually a light, it's a separate light. The signage is not backlit. It's actually at the bottom We'll be working through this detail, but you can
On
see
the bottom,
in this section here, it's on the bottom lighting up. So it might be
Oh, I
that
see.
that
Okay.
lift gets a little bit bigger to get the light angle correct on the sign.
Right,
But yes,
right.
the sign will be simple letters, not lit,
Yeah.
with a separate light.
Because it kind of looks like it's backlit in this image, and I just wanted to make sure we're clear that it's not.
It is not
Okay.
backlit.
Okay, commissioners, any other clarifying questions on this, these four refinements before we take public comment? Okay, so we'll go ahead and take public comment, but I want to just point out at the outset, just to clarify, there were these four items that were denied without prejudice in the prior hearing, and the balance of the proposal was approved. And so we're going to take public comment now, but we are only going to take public comment on those four items that Ruthie just outlined for us. The revised cornice, the revised soffit transition, the lighting plan, and the signage plan, as detailed in the images that she just showed us. So we only want to hear comments that are germane to those four items, because those are the only things that are being adjudicated tonight. With that, if you want to be heard on the record, please raise your hand in the Zoom with the Zoom button, the raise hand button on your Zoom, and Nick will unmute you.
Great. First up we have is Rochelle with Civic Association. Rochelle, go ahead.
Beacon Hills Civic Association, we do not oppose the cornice and soffit transition as it satisfies guideline A5, which states contemporary design for new buildings may be considered if such design is of excellent quality and is compatible with the size, scale, color, materials, and character of neighboring buildings and environment. We do not oppose the signage as it satisfies guideline I7 for a number of signs, location, and attachment in relation to size of the shop front and scale of the building. We oppose the proposed signage illumination as illumination is discouraged by guideline I12 and the soffit lights are not installed in a traditional location to meet guideline I6. We oppose the silver place catenary lighting fixtures as they are not appropriate in style or location to meet guideline I6. End of comment.
Thank you, Rochelle. All right, and Mark, I am not seeing any other public comment. Let me just check online very quickly and make sure that we're being comprehensive here. No, I'm not seeing the other public comment, so we can close it for this application.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. Let's see, so why don't we take these, unless someone has a better idea, in order. That might just be simpler to go through. So starting with the cornice, so is it fair to say you're kind of splitting the difference here? I was okay with the prior version, but this is more subtle. It looks to my eye like it is responsive to the comments that were raised before, trying to tone this down a little bit, to use a obviously non-technical term. So I'm okay with what's proposed here as the solution. This is the proposed update on the third panel on the right here. Commissioners Jackson and Alan, do you have views on this?
No.
I don't have a view on it either.
Okay, that makes it easy. And just to clarify, Ruthie, this is at the top of the building as well as the transition from the first floor to the second floor, for lack of a better term?
Yes, that is correct, in both locations.
Okay, great, just to clarify.
As you can see the other version here.
Yeah, okay, great. So then let's move on to the soffit transition. And yeah, I think there was a concern about this looking a little bit too the old expression we used to use, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, just trying to characterize what my colleague was trying to avoid, is sort of the Home Depot special, where something looks less architectural and more like a stock, to use your words, piece of molding and so forth. And just to recap, we've already got, I think, a significant advance from the prior iteration of this treatment of the whole ground floor, and you've kept, importantly, these details of the sort of three-dimensionality of these tiles. And so just to clarify, this transition, while more square, and less looking like molding. You still have that nice lip on it, right? Which it's a little hard to see in the diagram, but in the transition, can you zoom in on the proposed alternative so we can see that a little better?
Yes, well, let me get out of presentation mode. You want to zoom in on the profile?
Yeah, for starters, yeah. So you still have that nice lip, which gives you another shadow line and a little more texture dimension. Now, if we can move over to the actual rendering of the thing, you can still see that. So it's less curved, but it's still got that texture, which I quite like. So I am fine with this alternative. Ralph or Arian? Oh, let me ask you if we're okay with this. Just while we're looking at this image, just to clarify, the transition of the pier from the tile to the granite at the bottom, was that just an issue with the rendering, or does it really just sit right on the granite there? Yeah, I think it
what
might just be
we're
an issue with
proposing
the rendering.
here, it's an issue with the rendering, yeah.
Yeah.
What we're proposing here is that there is a little reveal and there's a flashing detail, and the granite edge will actually be canted a little bit and out a little bit.
Great. Okay, very good. In fact, if you just move over to your left, I think you can see that in the other rendering. It's there. Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, there's a little chamfer.
Yeah, nice. Okay. I was just concerned that might have been needed a little more attention, but I think it's fine now that we see that. Okay, Ralph, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off there? Do you want to get another in here?
Until they show the small, I'm looking at the base of the right-hand side of the facade, the brick coming down on the right. And it seems as if it doesn't have a sort of transition. So you've shown me a close-up of that there's a transition that will occur, I assume consistently along the top edge of the granite, but it's not apparent. Right now, it looks as if the two materials are coplanar and in both pilaster and in condition. And I was troubled by that lack of a transition. But
so does that
created one?
I'm sorry,
No.
Ralph. Go ahead, Ruthie.
There's a transition that's
so same question, Ruthie, for that brick pier.
Same transition.
Same transition.
Yeah. Okay, so Ralph, it's just an error in the or a problem in the rendering. So it would have that so a chamfer and then a slight reveal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thanks for spotting that, Ralph.
I'm sorry to go backward, but I wasn't here. The soldier courses, I'll call them, at the soffit, the detail, that's the same at the top as it is here?
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It is the same.
Because your drawings suggest top and bottom are treated differently. Okay.
Just let me just jump to one here where you can see. It might be that the lighting is just a little more dramatic.
Well, it looks as if the top edge of the brick, the soldier course has a different detail than the bottom.
There is a little, flashing cap over that.
Yeah.
That be minimized, but to kind of manage for water at that top edge.
Okay.
Okay. So anything else on the soffit, the revised soffit transition? Okay, let's turn to the let's actually talk about signage next, if maybe that was next anyway. So I like the revision. This was I think a comment that Commissioner Feingold had made about wanting to anticipate the transition to Charles Street. I think this does that nicely with the blade signs. Nick and I were talking about this at some length, that I think this is an opportunity, and I think you've taken the opportunity here to unify at least the treatment of the signage with respect to the hardware and the dimensions and so forth. And this is something, understanding that there's going to be two spaces, commercial spaces down here, and you're going to have potentially different businesses. I think that's worth doing on this building. So I like what you've done here, and to try to make them as consistent as possible. There's an example of this that I will say I quite like, that's quite recent, a building of similar scale and to a very first approximation, analogous design, let's just say, if not similar, which is at about halfway down Newbury Street. It's on the corner of what is that street? And I think it's Exeter, maybe. Looking at the street sign here. Dartmouth, sorry. Yes.
Dartmouth, I would think.
Newbury and Dartmouth. And they have adopted a unified signage plan that allows for the individual expression of businesses through their individual typefaces and so forth, but in a uniform manner. And I think that would be a good course of action for this building as well. So I like what you've got here. And Nick, I don't know, or maybe I'm not sure whose screen is being shared, but just to illustrate it as an example, if we could bring up, I think it's like around 150 Newbury Street.
We'll stop sharing. I can
the
try
new
to pull it up
construction.
too.
Oh, yeah.
I got it.
Okay, thanks. Nick.
Yep.
Bringing up an old project of mine, Mark.
Oh, there you go. Very good. So here, this building's a bit larger in scale in terms of its length anyway, but similar, and a quite recent building. And you can see from the ground floor where they've got retail spaces and so forth, they've got a consistent treatment all the way across in the coloring, and these individual sort of applied letters. There's the Google store on the left there. So they're maintaining the logo marks of the individual businesses, but treating them consistently. And I think that's a really nice approach that provides the necessary purpose of the signage while not overwhelming the architecture or causing undue discord with all the hard work you've done to try to realize the building. And so I think, commissioners, I'm this is a long-winded point, but I think a basic question we have here, I'm comfortable with the signage that they've proposed in terms of the brackets, which is all we have at the moment. And this is also an example, by the way, of these applied individual letters, which I think is what you're proposing, basically those belt signs that say signage spelled out in applied letters. Would be in a consistent material, not necessarily same font, but consistent material. So here's an example of what that might look like in practice, commissioners, if it's helpful. I like that approach, and I think I would like to see that here. We can worry the exact details as to the coloring and so forth of the letters, but I think I like what's proposed given this recent example.
It is very dignified and unemphatic, I would say.
Yeah.
To my mind, the projections and the overall facade seem similar in terms of heft. When I look at the blade signs, they seem as if they're placeholders rather than scaled to the facade. They seem thin relative to the dimensions of your other facade material, your materiality and scale.
Okay, and Ruthie, by the way, what are the dimensions of the blade signs?
They are 2 foot by 3 foot.
Okay, so that's
depth.
You're Ralph. You're talking about the material
depth rather than
the depth.
The ironwork is thin. You're saying, not so much the size of the sign, right? Okay, okay. Can we go back to our subject property now?
Yes.
But admittedly, my viewpoint might not be shared by others. But when I look at the signage elements, the sign point sizes, suddenly the blades seem sort of thin, given the scale of your tiles and brick and what have you.
It's an
Yeah, there is
interesting
a
observation.
Ralph, what about and not to get too and the last thing we want to do, I don't want to try to design this for you. Obviously, you put a lot of work into this, but I really like the detail that was introduced a couple of iterations ago. Just to the left of the window, if you of the sign, you see the window where there's this. If we can zoom in on that, it's a simple but I think really elegant detail where it's two pieces of thin metal, you know, with a gap. You know, I wonder if there's a way to satisfy Commissioner Jackson's intuition that maybe this thing ought to have a little more heft to it by mirroring that somehow. That so you're kind of in keeping with that. So you have both the heft and the lightness that you've really, I think, wonderfully achieved in the windows.
Your building is so concerned with craft. When I get to the blade signs, I'm missing that.
Well, thank you. I'll
Yeah,
we'll
that's a
take that as a
compliment.
compliment. Yeah, that's. I think it's a great point. I think it's a great point. So we can certainly take a look at that. Yeah. No doubt.
I could imagine that if the blade signs were a little thicker and they were surrounded by a narrower fillet, that would answer the window detail nicely.
Right. Okay. And while we're at it, Ralph, and further to that point, I had not appreciated until we zoomed in on this that at least the way you've rendered it here, the projecting signs would also have these applied letters to give them some more depth, which I also quite like. Now we understand, of course, that we don't know what the you know, logos and so forth of the businesses that will come in here will be. But I think that would be consistent with Commissioner Jackson's observation that we want to give these signs a bit more architectural quality. So I like that as well. And I guess, Commissioners, one basic question is, should we, in effect, do what I'm suggesting, which is require the signage to be consistent with this program, regardless of what the ultimate you know, logos are and so forth. Nick assures me that this is something that's been done a number of times. Probably, indeed, the example we looked at on Newbury Street is just one such example in another historic district. So we're within our purview to do that here. And I think it would, because the last thing we want to see is all this elegance undone when the business moves in with signage that's kind of incongruous with all the thought you've put into the rest of this. Okay,
we
so
agree.
it sounds like. So, Arian, any further thoughts on? I'm persuaded that some more attention can be paid to the projecting signs to address Commissioner Jackson's comments. But do you have any further thoughts on that specifically, Arian?
I mean, look at the signage. I definitely see what he says, that it looks pretty thin. Again, and this is just a rendering. It's not the real deal. So I can see how in real life it wouldn't look that way, but that's a hope. I don't know whether that would be the case or not.
But are you okay with moving it a little bit further in the direction that Ralph was talking about? Would you be okay?
Yes, I'm in agreement with that.
Great. Okay. We'll come back to that when we make a motion. That might be something we could delegate to Nick if Ralph is comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But to the team, to Ruthie and folks, is that enough to go on in terms of what we're hoping to achieve there? Great. Okay, so finally, let's come to the lighting, unless you've got anything else on that. So again, just to quickly recap, the lighting is kind of doing two things here, right? It is illuminating the signs, and it's also illuminating the space underneath the overhang, albeit subtly, right? And that's the extent of it, right? You're not washing the facade with light and so forth. You're just lighting the signs individually, and then the ground, basically.
Basically the ground. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, with respect to the illumination of the signs, that was raised by Rochelle and the Civic Association in the comments. Obviously, we've already talked about this in a prior application. I don't know if you guys were on, but we have a guideline that discourages, doesn't prohibit, but discourages the illumination of signs. I think it's fair to say the thing we are most averse to, which we would prohibit, of course, is the internal lighting of signs, neon signs or otherwise electric signs that are lit internally. That's not what's proposed here, as we've clarified. I have said earlier, even earlier tonight, I think there's a meaningful distinction that could be made for those businesses such as restaurants, most obviously or especially that are open during later hours where illumination of the signage is arguably necessary to serve the purposes of signage in the first instance. We don't know, of course, in this case, what businesses will be in here, and it would be unfair to require you to know that at this stage. So I think we have this basic question of illuminating the signs. I think I would draw a distinction in this case, and commissioners chime in here, but understanding that the signage that's proposed for illumination is under this overhang all the way across, as you can see here. And so it doesn't benefit from the spill of light that would naturally occur from other, ambient sources, streetlights and things like that, that other buildings would have. And so while we don't know what's going to be in here, whether it's going to be a restaurant and so forth, I think we can reasonably conjecture that I wouldn't presume to speak for the community, but there's a pharmacy there now that's open late in the existing building. I suspect one way or the other, there will be, we have heard, I won't speak for the community, but I will paraphrase longstanding concerns that have been raised by the community in thinking about which businesses are in this commercial district, part of the district, to have a space that is somehow activated for safety purposes. So large storefronts that are illuminated and most desirably, I think, activated by people is to be desired. And so I think in both of those respects, I think there's an argument to be made in this case for the tasteful illumination of the signs from external sources, and generally in the manner that's proposed here. Again, because it serves the sort of public interest safety purpose, not that that's strictly speaking in our purview, but and then also to the extent that the business would be open later during darker hours, it's necessary for the signage to do its job. And then thirdly, to the extent that it's under an overhang, it's not going to benefit from the spill of ambient light.
I think that latter point is particularly significant, Mark, because the shadow that the cantilever, as much reduced as it has been, will cast on the signage would be commercially disadvantageous.
I would add one more thing, and I'm sorry to talk so much, but I just remembered something that came up in the discussion with Nick earlier. There are nevertheless ambient sources around here, but they're streetlights. It's not in close proximity to another business across the street that is a big, lit storefront or something like that. And so the quality of the ambient light that, such as it is, that's going to spill on this building is not great, I think it's fair to say. And so this is an opportunity to have a little more control over that and make the signage and the first floor of this building just look better than it would look. And again, in an architectural sense, look better than it would look if only illuminated at night by the spill of ambient light from streetlights and so forth. Ralph and Arian, any thoughts?
Well, I'm looking at the Envoy Hotel entry canopy image, and I'm looking at the larger signage, and the fact that the interior is dark and there is no lighting of the underside of the soffit sort of says, I feel as if certain things are missing in the image. The sense of life that goes on after dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. This is not intended to be a realistic rendering of the nighttime, but more illustration of the additive lights that would be.
Yeah, so
to your point, yeah.
it's not
yeah.
selling your, it's not selling your first
True.
floor.
How
Well,
feasible
it's
would
hard, it's hard to render when,
Yeah.
you know, the tenant selection is not even begun.
Well, and
Well,
there's
this
no,
isn't
there
the
is
case
no
of
ambient,
who the tenant
there's no
is.
ambient lighting either.
This is a
but-
lighting,
Yeah, this is a
lighting
lighting issue.
But there would be
composition
different-
issue. It's
different-
not about who inhabits the space, but
Right.
what the space feels like.
No, I
and-
understand. My point is that there are different levels of animation within the storefront if it's retail or restaurant use, for example.
But the architects agree this it currently lacks light animation.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest, we were trying to pull out all of the other, there's definitely street lighting, there'll be light from the retail. These will be
Yeah.
residencies that will have their lights on as well.
Yeah,
We were working with our lighting designer to help just pull out and extract just the lights we were proposing to add on top of
Yeah.
those, rather than showing it all comprehensively.
Yeah.
So wait a minute, just to make sure that I get this. So you're not proposing to have a light that's going on all the time, correct?
You mean on the exterior of the building?
Like
I think.
there was something that
I said about the soft.
yes, 'cause I'm looking at that, I'm like,
Yeah, so Arian, if it's helpful, to just paraphrase what Ruthie just said, this is showing us only the
Location.
effect of the lighting that they are proposing and no other lights. And so I think as a result, unfortunately, because we're not benefiting from what would be presumably some kind of brighter space inside or the street lights outside, this looks like the visual impact in this is exaggerated. It looks a lot brighter, I think, than it would in person if the building is really there at night, because there's in the darker spaces here, both inside and outside of the building, those darker spaces are going to be filled with a lot more light. Inside from whatever's in there, if it's a restaurant, it could be.
I
quite a
mean,
bit of
no,
light.
I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it's new building, it's modern, it's not really the neighborhood. So I'm just looking at the lights. I'm like, those lights look super modern. So that's definitely throwing me. I don't know.
When you say super modern, Erin, can you just expand on that a little bit? And
I
you say
great
those
example.
lights.
So earlier in our meeting, for a totally different place, in totally different circumstances, we discussed the gooseneck lighting. You know, it has a bit of a historic feel to it. It matches the neighborhood much more. And I look at this and it's like, I don't understand how anyone could have a lighting situation that would match the neighborhood on this particular building. So that's what I'm grappling with.
I see.
Yeah, no.
If I could,
Yeah,
you
William,
know,
go ahead.
I think gooseneck lighting seems to work best when it's an accommodation of a new or adaptive commercial use in an originally non-commercial building, often residential, for example, on Charles Street. Here, where we have a purpose-built mixed-use building, there are opportunities to integrate the signage into the architecture, and I think this is what we've endeavored to do here. And perhaps the section drawing to the right is more indicative of how that's been done.
Yeah, and I'll add on, I think, Arian, to your point, the fixtures that we're showing do look like modern fixtures, but the way that we're trying to design it is that they will not actually be visible. So what you'll get is the qualities of light without an additive fixture on top of the building design that already has layers of detail. We're kind of trying to build into the layers of detail that we've already put into the soffit and the other elements and hide the actual light sources. So you just get the richness of that additional layer of light on top of the other design elements and the other lighting, which I think, as we've talked about, is not showing up in this specific rendering.
All right.
Erin, the other thing I would just add is, and forgive me if I'm just kind of restating what's been said, but there's also kind of a unusual, if not unique, condition here in that we don't just have a flat facade of the building where the sign would go. So in this previous application that you referenced for the restaurant on Cambridge Street, they've just got a flat upper portion of the facade and they'll have a flat sign on that. And there's an opportunity then to mount lights above that to shine onto the sign. Here, we're really just, these signs are kind of necessarily crammed into this relatively short space that's got window below it, and then it has these architectural details of the sort of cascading a soffit above it. So I think this is to my mind, a quite reasonable approach. If you had to mount fixtures on the outside, like the gooseneck lights and so
No,
forth.
I'm not so much saying mount. Again, my whole thing is just, I'm trying to wrap my head around how this would blend in to the neighborhood the most. So that's just,
Yeah,
like I said, as I already stated, I'm grappling with that.
Yeah,
I
that's
think it
why we're
might
here.
be-
Exactly, right.
I think it might blend in quite easily, Commissioner Allen, because the lighting is going to be from a concealed source. So I suspect one isn't even going to be aware of where it's originating from. It's just going to do its job in a very seamless fashion. That's our anticipation and that's our intention.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, an analogy would be,
No, I
okay,
got it.
you got it. Okay, so sorry, I won't belabor the point. Okay, so any, I want to move this along here, but I don't want to cut it short. Does that mean we're okay with this plan? With respect, and we're just talking about the illumination of this the street side of the building. We'll come to the catenary lighting on the alley side in a moment, but are we okay with this?
I consider the rendering about signage location.
I'm sorry, say again, Ralph?
I consider the rendering to be about signage location.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a night shot, but
yeah,
I'm comfortable with location.
Okay, with respect to the treatment of the lighting though, understanding the limitations of this image, Ralph, is there something more that you need before you'd be comfortable approving it?
No.
Okay, so okay, I just wasn't sure if your comments were
I wish
the image were a concern or just an observation. Yeah,
I wish the rendering were more ambitious in its portrayal of lighting in the evening, but
what it'll actually look like. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say an ideal
we'll
world.
discipline the lighting designer, I promise.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think it's fair to blame the lighting designer.
Okay, let's move around the corner then to the catenary lights in the forgive me, the name
Silver
of this
Place.
Silver Place.
Silver
Thank
Place.
you. So there was a comment from the Civic Association, I think, objecting to this treatment. We should just recap quickly, is a revision to an earlier proposal, also for sort of catenary style lighting, but just sort of a more uniform, simplified treatment and so forth, where they're just hanging in the middle and so forth, using the fixture shown in the upper right. And I don't know, I think I'm fine with this. It's an interesting treatment. This is a space in between, of course, the old building on the right and the new one on the left. I don't know that we have an obvious direction that would recommend itself for the treatment of the lighting of this space. I think lighting it from above, if you're going to contemplate that, this is, I think, about as elegant as a way you could do that. And maybe one of its virtues is it avoids large fixtures on the facade of the building. But and again, this is kind of a unique circumstance where we're lighting this exterior space in between the buildings rather than the building itself. So it's less a feature of the building's architecture so much as just how to treat this void in between the two buildings, which it's worth noting is the access for the residential space. So it requires certainly lighting of some kind.
Yeah.
Ralph, Arian, or anyone, go ahead.
Was there a question?
What do you think of the?
It looks fragile. I'm wondering over time, vandalism and what have you. They're lovely, but I don't know how if the soffit of the bays, recessed lighting in the soffit would see. I've never seen a sort of this kind of solution in that kind of sort of public condition. So I don't know what the future. It looks lovely, but it feels.
Are you saying it looks lovely but unrealistic? Is that what you're trying to say, Ralph?
It looks vulnerable.
Mm.
I don't know if the architects feel that way.
I think we wanted to have something that floated between the historic building to the right and the new construction, rather than favoring either one or trying to select a common fixture that would look appropriate to each. So this seems to float above the residential corridor.
I hear the argument that you're offering, but it doesn't alter the way that it impacts me. I understand the need for a light source along that alleyway. I think this is your solution. I'm not going to object to it, but I'm simply saying my feeling is that it looks vulnerable to. I would ask Nick, what do you about this kind of solution historically? If he has.
Sorry, about what solution? The lighting?
Yeah.
The catenary.
Do you have any added feelings about this kind of lighting and that kind of public condition on the hill? Or
I mean, I can't think of anything that would be historically similar to this, but
not from a historical point of view, but from a hazard point of view.
In terms of safety?
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any issue. I do know that there's lighting techniques that are used like this in the south end, specifically in the protection area near the warehouse area, that's been implemented rather successfully. And I also think that the if I'm not mistaken, the oh, I got it. Yeah. The Seaport, Thompson Place has almost these identical lights that are over Thompson Place, which is actually a private way, and it's executed rather lovely, and it's been there for approximately 5 to 6 years, and there hasn't been any issues. So yes, thank you. Yeah, sorry, that took me a second or two to get up to speed, but yes, it has been implemented and in a historic district in Boston. And I can actually pull up a graphic if you'd like to see it, because I was the one that worked on that. Although I will say that this is a little brighter than we would like. If you've ever been down in Thompson Place at night, it's rather dramatic, and not necessarily in a good way, but this is not at the same scale. So so this is Thompson Place. This is actually a private way, so it's not regulated by the city of Boston. It's not a Boston public way, but you can see they are up here, and they go all the way up and down the block. Yeah.
Where are they? I don't.
This is Thompson Place in Fort Point.
Yes, but I don't see the fixture.
Oh,
right in the middle. There you go.
Oh, that's 30 feet up in the air.
So these are probably 12 feet up in the air, right?
Yeah, they are.
At that point, yeah.
Maybe a little closer to 14 feet.
They're about 14 feet off the ground. So I don't think it's not that someone's gonna reach out and touch them or
Yeah.
anything of that nature. So
And I can add on to, I mean, we are working with Lamb Lighting Partners on this, and they've done installs of these catenary fixtures, and I think similar locations to what Nick is showing, but also outdoor locations in different urban areas. So I think
as I'm looking at the wall mounted lighting, I just wish there was some sort of casing that suggested that the light had some level of protection. But I'm the only one who has feelings about this, and
Well, I think
don't think that should govern.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on the applicant to maintain these things. It's in their interest to do so, right? Clearly. And I think it seems by all accounts, given particularly the attention that's been paid to this so far, I'm reasonably confident that they will maintain the building in a pretty high standard. And it is worth saying, since it's a matter of public record, it's the same owner that owns both buildings, right? So they are doubly incentivized to keep this a place well illuminated. And
both buildings and the Whitney Hotel.
And the Whitney.
Yeah. And the Whitney, by the way, also has exterior fixtures that are no higher, probably a little lower, right on the surface. So with respect to the vulnerability to vandalism and things like that, I think it's no worse than the condition on the Whitney across the street, and those have fared just fine, at least so far.
This is Stone Street in Lower Manhattan. The light fixtures are there too, and very similar situation. They have these up all year long. So
yeah.
Also a historic district, I might add.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So let's just quickly recap. So I think, well, I'm sorry. I don't, again, I don't want to presume, but so does that mean we're okay? Do we have a consensus on the revised proposed catenary lighting that we see here? Are we okay with it? That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
is that a reluctant yes, Ralph?
I didn't realize. I thought the image. I thought it was attached to the underside of the soffits, but I didn't see the catenary thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Hey.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay. So to recap, we have consensus on the revised cornice and the lower one. We have I think consensus on the revised soffit transition in favor of what's proposed, the revised proposal. I believe we have consensus on the signage plan, but with the further direction that we want to use the non-technical term, add a bit more heft to the projecting sign, perhaps informed by or to be made harmonious with the treatment that's been the revised treatment around the window frames and so forth. And I think we have consensus in favor of the lighting plan. One more note on the signage plan. I think we also have consensus that I believe this is actually, let me ask the architects, and forgive me if I don't recall if this is a detail that's spelled out in your proposal, but I think we have consensus on using a uniform treatment for the multiple signs across what will be multiple businesses in both the projecting signs and the flat signs. Is that correct? And is that in your proposal, or is it just in an image somewhere that we can see what you're intending?
It's just in an image at this point, but that was where we were going with.
Okay, so I want to make that formal in the, so we're talking about individual applied letters for the signs, and again, not in this font or whatever, but and consistent materials, coloring, etc.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Okay, and so then, Ralph, with respect to this one more pass at the projecting signs, with the comments that you've made that we've affirmed, would you be comfortable having Nick approve a final version of that, or do you want that to come back?
No, absolutely. Nick can do it.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thank you. This is helpful. Any further discussion before I make a motion? Okay, I will make a motion then that the application be approved as follows with respect to the cornice as submitted in the revised design, with respect to the soffit transition as submitted in the revised design, with respect to the signage as submitted per the revised design with the following provisos. That the signage specify consistent treatment of signs across businesses with respect to specifically applied letters of consistent coloring and materials with respect to the flat signs, and applied lettering of consistent coloring and materials with respect to the projecting signs, and that the bracketry for the projecting signs be revised specifically to provide a stronger expression or more heft, quote unquote, perhaps informed by or harmonious with the treatment now evident in the revised design of the window frames, with the final design to be approval of the final design to be delegated to staff. And then with respect to the lighting, with respect to the lighting of the exterior signage, the down lighting in the soffit, and the catenary lighting in Silver Place, approved as submitted per the revised design, with shop drawings detailing all of the above to be submitted to staff and approved prior to any construction. Did I miss anything? Nick, we're good?
Maybe just a little gentle reminder about the mock-ups.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I literally have a note which I circled multiple times, and I missed that. Sorry. Thank you, Nick. With the previously described, subject to approval of the previously described mock-up showing each of the principal materials and components, facade, masonry, the cornices, the window frames, the tile material on the first floor, and the soffit material to be submitted and approved in advance before any construction. Is that sufficient, Nick? Of a scale sufficient
Well,
to.
point of clarification, if I may.
Yeah.
Do you want submitted or reviewed on site?
Reviewed on site, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
And as we said before, but just to reaffirm, of a scale sufficient to understand the proportions, materiality, coloring, etc. In other words, as we described before, what you proposed is sufficient. We're not asking you to build an entire actual quarter of the building or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a mood board.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Nick, how's that? Okay. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Do I hear second?
Second.
Okay, we will vote. Commissioner Allen.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Kiefer votes aye. Okay, so the application is approved with those provisos. Thank you, Ruthie, Eric, William, and company for the further hard work and your attention to our your thoughtful response to our comments. It's been a very productive process, and we really appreciate your attention and your work in this. I think it's going to be a great building, and we look forward to seeing the mock-up and eventually the finished product. Thanks again. You'll get a letter from Nick, of course. Any questions, just follow up with him.
Thank you all.
It's been a great process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Okay, next is administrative review. Before we take public comments, which I'm actually going to remember to ask for, believe it or not, a streak of one meeting. Any comments, questions, clarifications, or recusals with respect to any or all of the administrative review items? Okay, hearing none, we will go ahead and take public comment. If you want to be heard on the record on any one or all of the administrative review items, please raise your hand using the button on the bottom of your Zoom panel and Nick will unmute you. Is anyone even left? Anyone? Rochelle, Patricia? No? Holland?
Not seeing anybody. Yeah.
Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve administrative review items en masse?
I motion to approve.
Okay, do we ever hear a second?
Second,
Okay, we will vote to approve administrative review items en masse. Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
aye.
Commissioner Kiefer votes aye. Okay, administrative items are approved. Thank you. Next staff updates, Nick.
Not a lot to report here, just a couple announcements here. We have 2 new landmarks, the Copley Plaza Hotel and
Yay.
the Swallow Mansion at 33 Cordis was authorized by the Landmarks Commission and it's now with City Council. It most likely will also be a landmark. It's one of the very few temple front Greek Revival mansions in the city of Boston. So if you have a chance, just go to our website. It's a beautiful property. It's going to be an official landmark. And then, of course, we have Memorial Hall that's coming up as another pending landmark that will likely pass with enthusiasm from the community. So that's it. No updates or news about our district specifically. We did receive some nominations for and renominations for commissioner appointments. And we're working on getting those set up and sent over to the mayor's office. So that's it on my side, and we're good to go.
Great, thank
Happy
you, Nick.
Memorial Day. Yeah.
Yes, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay, well, happy Memorial Day, everyone. Have a great weekend, and
Happy
we'll
Memorial
vote. We'll
Day.
vote. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Yay.
Okay, have a great weekend, everyone.
Have a great one, guys.
Bye bye
Take
now.
care. Thanks.